just a few more words about interpretation of Scripture. And again, these come out of my experience. And so the first is somewhat related to the things that we were talking about, or I was talking about a little earlier, having to do with all of the tools that we bring to Scripture. And I remember, and I still hear it all the time, about the delight that people have, that some people have when they realize that some of the, quote, more objectionable, unquote, parts of letters that are attributed to Paul were probably not by Paul. So, there's this debate about which are the real Pauline letters and which ones are not, like 1st, 2nd Timothy and Titus, and some of those other ones that seem to have passages that don't comport so well with current sensibilities, or passages that have been included in 1 Corinthians about women, for example. And I went through that sort of period of delight too. The problem is that it's Scripture, and whether or not Paul wrote it, it's Scripture. And so I think that in terms of our interpretation of what we bring to a text, we have to remember that we can't willy-nilly say, well, we don't have to pay any attention to that because Paul didn't write it. Well, whether or not Paul wrote it, it is still part of the New Testament canon. And so we have to figure out a way to grapple with that. And we have other interpretive tools, but we have to be careful about being dismissive. For a number of years, I listened to a bunch of podcasts. I don't read very much anymore, just don't have time, but I make use of all the time that I have, either in the gym or cycling or whatever, listening to podcasts. So I get a lot of information, and I hear about a lot of books and hear a lot of books orally. But I listened to a series of podcasts called Search the Scriptures, and this was put together by an Eastern Orthodox, Greek Orthodox scholar who teaches at the University of San Diego. And so she talked about how various apostolic fathers and church fathers would interpret Scripture. She would then go book by book by book. I guess she's in Ezekiel right now. I had to remind myself of what she was doing, and talk about how the various early church writers would interpret Ezekiel. Her favorite theologian is John Chrysostom. But she made the point in one of the earlier lectures that it was the church that decided that these texts were Scripture. They didn't fall from heaven bound in a book called the New Testament or the Old Testament. That even the formation of the New Testament, I'm sure you know, took 300 and some years to come together, and that certain books, like the book of Revelation, were questioned up until the very end. And certainly Martin Luther wanted to get rid of the book of James, but he couldn't do it. And we can't get rid of the book of Revelation or some of these other books that we would really like to say, gosh, those are inconvenient. We have to deal with them. And we have to deal with them honestly. We have to recognize that they're going to push sometimes they'll push some of our buttons. And some of the things that we really like will push other people's buttons. And that's just a challenge that we have to face. So as you work with your Patronus on scriptural interpretation, disagree with him or her. And that's okay. Make it clear, that you're disagreeing. If the Patronus is speaking in the first person, then, put your comments in brackets. Or something like that, just so we know how all of that is working. So your assignment is to really talk about how your Patronus reads Scripture. What are the tools? What are the contexts? Who is he or she combating if they are doing that? What are the methods? Why is the Patronus reading Scripture in the way that he or she does? And I've got all of the particular questions that you might consider. You don't have to consider them all, but just something to guide how you're thinking. And maybe, yes, let your Patronus speak in the first person. And as you respond to other posts, have your Patronus respond to the other person's Patronus, so that we do get a conversation going on. If you, as the student, want to interject too, that's fine, but again, make it clear that you're the interjector and not your Patronus. And you might, whenever you are posting, remind us who your Patronus is, so that we don't have to fumble around and say, oh, who's Amy's Patronus? Why? I can't remember. So anyway, have fun with this. Have fun with all of this. And I think we'll all come out learning a heck of a lot.